Welcome to this special report about Christians facing persecution in Islamic countries. I'm Gary Lane. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world today. That's roughly 23% of the world's population. Most that I've met are friendly and peaceful. Many just want to live a good life and provide for their families. But it's militant extremists, those with a violent fundamentalist view of the Quran and their governments, that are posing the greatest threat to Christians and religious freedom around the world. I recently sat down to talk with Jason Peters of the Voice of the Martyrs. VOM has a new book out called IMN, Noon, Christian. I asked Jason to explain that title and share some of the stories of Christian suffering in Muslim countries.
Many people have seen the symbol on social media and other places. It looks kind of like a U with a dot on top of it, but it's the Arabic letter Nun, as you mentioned. It's the first letter of the word that defines Christians in the Quran. Nazarene is really where it comes from. You know, Christian, the singular for Christian is Nazrani, which comes from Nazarene and Jesus of Nazareth, of course. So when they spray painted this symbol on your home, you were marked. You were tagged, and the question was, how would you respond? And the stories in the book are remarkable about the choices that Christians made to stand firm in their faith.
It's a little bit like the Holocaust with the Jews and the Yellow Star of David that they were branded with. How did the Christians respond to that?
Well, it's interesting. I've been surprised by how matter-of-fact they are about their faith. And one, in fact, said this. He said, I was born a Christian and I will die a Christian. And of course, he was so committed to his faith that he was unwilling to give it up no matter what the consequences were. And you think about it, it's a very distinct choice that we have to make. And each one of us has to make this choice every day. Are we going to follow Christ or not? And I don't think for most of us in the United States, it's ever this sort of clear. You know what I mean? It's not this defined one moment. You're tagged and you have to choose. Will you follow Christ or will you abandon your faith? And so for those Christians who made that decision, to me, it's very inspirational.
Now, you have one chapter in the book that talks about the day that ISIS came into Mosul.
Well, there is a story that begins the book, the story of Abu Fadi. And he had choices to make early on. He said, I know that they're coming, ISIS is coming. In fact, he received a phone call from a friend saying, hey, ISIS is coming. We have to decide, how we're going to respond. And they knew that the stakes were very high. He chose to take his family out. And it was amazing the miraculous encounters that he had along the way. That's something that we hear a lot about, is supernatural interventions. I mean, the way that God shows up in these stories is remarkable. I mean, some of the examples are angels delivering people, guards being distracted so that they can run away. I mean, it's just incredible. But I met with a Christian who said that what happened was over the course of 10 days, ISIS changed their tactics a bit. When they arrived in Mosul, it was June of 2014, they initially were announcing on loudspeakers, Christians, here are your options. They were spray painting the Noon on people's homes and Christian-owned businesses. But then, as they noticed all the Christians leaving, this brother I met with said that they began to stop the Christians at checkpoints and they began to take things away from them. As I think they started to see the loot kind of sneaking out the back door, and they said, wait a minute, we want that stuff. And so they began to really attack Christians even as they were trying to leave.
And, our Secretary of State now has finally come out and said, this is genocide. What has happened to Christians in Iraq and Syria is genocide.
Yeah, I'm really glad that the Secretary of State and the U.S. government has recognized the plight of these Christians. And I'm not running for president, so I don't have a case for whether or not it's genocide in the actual definition of the word. It's not about ethnic cleansing. It's really about Christian faith and identity. And I think that's a distinction. But those are nuances. The bottom line is these are our Christian family members. They are brothers and sisters who are really suffering. I mean, think about this. If you're, I love what Ray Vander Laan said. He says, if you're putting a picture on the wall and you hit your finger with a hammer, it hurts. And you would never say, oh, I'm not suffering, just my finger's suffering. No, it's about the body. We're the body of Christ. And so when one suffers, we all suffer. Of course, one of the theme verses of our ministry is Hebrews 13:3. We want to remember those who are suffering as if we ourselves were suffering, and to pray for those who are in prison as if we were going through a similar experience.
What have they told you that they want from us?
I'm glad you asked, and I think you know the answer, Gary, because you've met with so many persecuted Christians over the years. What they want first is prayer. That's what they want. They say, pray for us. We need God's help in this situation. And they have a strong faith in prayer. and they've seen miracles. They've seen God deliver. And so they ask for prayer. I always like to hear them say this too. They say, and by the way, we're praying for you. Have you ever heard them say that? Because they say, we don't know what's coming to the United States of America. I've met with Chinese Christians who say maybe persecution wouldn't be a bad thing for the United States of America in some ways, because they see the luxury, the comfort that we have and things like that. But they ask for prayer, but they also ask for practical help, and so we're able to provide very practical help. Sometimes it involves, rebuilding a home of someone whose home was burned down by extremists, or maybe providing some refuge for them in a safe house. I was just in Egypt not too long ago, where we have literally believers living in safe houses because if discovered, they will be killed by their family.
The blasphemy laws, we see them in Pakistan, the 295 law. We see blasphemy an issue in Egypt. Tell me what concern the Christians have about these laws.
Well, there's sort of this malleable law that can be adjusted. And by the way, just being accused of it is a serious crime, as we've seen with Asiya Bibi. Who knows exactly what happened at that well in her conversation, but now she's 5 years plus, in prison after this accusation, and of course has been sentenced and then appealed, and it's just, and now we know of at least two defenders of her and opponents of the blasphemy law who have been killed. As you know, you've reported on them, I'm sure. So it's interesting to think about the fact that just to say something that's perceived as negative against the prophet Muhammad could land you in prison and perhaps even facing the death penalty.
And it isn't even if you say something. Sometimes you're falsely accused for other reasons.
That's right, exactly. That's why I'm saying it's sort of like in the United States we have certain crimes that if you're accused of it, whether you're guilty or not, the accusation is really a challenge and it's difficult to overcome.
What about the United States? You think we're going to see persecution here?
Yes, we are experiencing persecution in sort of civil ways now, I believe, but I also think it's going to become more pronounced. I really do. I think that as long as we continue to talk about the exclusive claims of Christ, we're going to face opposition. This is what Jesus promised. He said, if you follow me, you're going to be persecuted. And so I love the way that he told his disciples to prepare, though. In Luke 21, he said, you're going to face persecution. You're going to be taken before the civil authorities, synagogues, governors. He said, but don't worry about what you're going to say. He said, I'm going to give you words and wisdom that your enemies will not be able to resist. They won't be able to contradict. And to me, that's a great encouragement, because I do believe that the day will come where, Gary, you or I, we could be standing before a court for saying the things that we say, which are, Jesus is the only way. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through him. It's for things like saying Islam is not a religion of peace, which is the politically correct way to identify Islam. It's simply not true. If you go back and look at the roots of Islam, it's not a religion of peace. In fact, when I was just recently meeting with a pastor in Iraq, he said what he's doing is he's frequently now finds himself talking to Muslims and saying, tell me this, what is different between what ISIS is doing right now and what Muhammad did? And he said they have no response. He said 1,400 years ago, Muhammad was doing the same things that ISIS is doing today.
It's not just the Islamic State that's persecuting Christians in the Middle East. A culture of intolerance of non-Muslims prevails in most countries where Muslims are the majority. I asked VOM's Jason Peters to share the story of an 11-year-old Turkish Christian named Hussein, who was bullied and threatened just for wearing a cross necklace to school. He had a little cross necklace. He went to school and he was bullied at school and even from the teacher.
It's not the physical cross, it's the meaning of the cross that's important. It's a beautiful thing. I wanted people to ask me about it, and then I could tell them about Christ.
It's amazing. Hussein is the example of a child who's grown up in this sort of oppression and just chose to stand boldly for Christ. And honestly, by his example, he's inspired others to stand strong for Christ.
Christ said, "You would suffer for me." It's okay to suffer for Christ. And we should be happy to suffer for Christ. The Lord is with me.
These are inspirational stories of Christians facing Islamic extremists. And there are 9 hotspots around the world that we could talk about where Islamic extremists are attacking Christians. And even the children, for us it doesn't seem quite fair that these young children have to make choices like this, but they do, and Hussein's a good example of making that sort of bold choice.
Well then, Miriam, I don't know that she's in the book, but I know she's been in your newsletter, and I met with her family, Miriam, in Iraq, in Kurdistan. They were chased out from Karakosh, and she says she forgives ISIS.
Amazing.
I mean, out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah.
What is it about kids that inspire us in that sense?
You know, I don't know. It's just God's supernatural intervention. That's all I can say, to be honest with you, Gary, because there's no human explanation. How can you look at someone who has raped your daughter and say, because Christ has forgiven me, I choose to forgive you? You know, but here's the interesting thing. ISIS fighters are being reached by this type of forgiveness. I mean, we're hearing stories about people saying, hey, this God is different than my God. You know, my God says to hate and to kill the kafir, to kill the infidel. Your God says love and forgive.
In the Bible, Jesus said to us, don't be afraid. I am with you. And also he said, forgive others, no matter who they are hating you. You have to forgive them. Jesus is my Father, and he is my Creator. I have no one else better than him. When ISIS drove us out of our home, his hand was on us, and he saved us.
Any other stories, Jason, that have touched you in the book that maybe you've met with the people personally, or I'd like you to share one or two.
Yeah, you know, probably the most remarkable one for me is Habila, and I know you've had a chance to interview Habila. I met with him in his home and heard his story. It's amazing. He's in northern Nigeria, and he was there late in the evening, was at home with his wife Vivian and their son, and all of a sudden Boko Haram came to their village. He said, as he prayed, Lord, may your will be done. And he went out there and he faced them and he said, yes, I am a Christian. And they first tried this sort of friendly approach. Well, why don't you convert to Islam? Say the Shahada. All you have to do is say there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, and then we will invite you into Boko Haram. We will provide you protection. We'll take care of you and your family. You won't have to worry about anything. And by the way, the stakes were very high, and he knew that because 20 Christians were killed in that village that night, and they'd heard these stories. He knew that it was a very real threat. But he said, no, I am a Christian, and I will be a Christian even to my death. And so then they appealed to Vivian, his wife. They looked at his wife and they said, please convince your husband to say the Shahada, to become a Muslim. We will take care of you. She refused. She began to cry, but she didn't try to persuade him. And then they said to her, because you have been unable to persuade him, now you will watch him die. And they shot him in the face with an AK-47. Literally took part of his face away. And as he laid on the ground, they kicked him, and then they said, Allahu Akbar, and walked away. And Vivian, immediately tried to apply pressure to his wound. God miraculously saved him. In fact, there's some cool stories behind that too. But at the end of the day, what I love about it is this is what he says. He says, if I saw the man who shot me today, I would embrace him and I would tell him that I forgive him.
Those of us who have met suffering Christians around the world have noticed a number of common attitudes or characteristics embraced by the persecuted. Among them are perseverance and forgiveness. Jason Peters says the stories in VOM's new book, I Am In, center around 5 different themes.
One was sacrifice. These Christians know that in Romans 12:1 says we present our bodies as a living sacrifice. For us, that doesn't, it's hard to understand that. For them, they know sacrifice. They've counted the cost. They're willing to pay the price. Another one is courage. They're boldly sharing Christ no matter what the opposition, which is a lesson that we could all learn from as well. Another one is faithfulness. How do you remain faithful when you're in a situation that seems so difficult? They believe that God is faithful and they want to faithfully follow him. The fourth one is perseverance. And that's a very interesting one because if you think about it, there's no sort of short-term solution. People have asked me, what do you think about Iraq? Is this going to be sort of cleared up in the next few years? And I don't think it is. I don't think there's a short-term solution in sight. But we do have eternal perspective. We do have an eternal hope. And so these brothers and sisters, they persevere. They take one more step. They just go one more day. They just continue to faithfully serve. Another one is joy. I am blown away, and I'm sure you have too, when you've met these brothers and sisters who've lost everything, but they're filled with joy in the Lord. It reminds me of the Apostle Paul, in Acts. He said, I want to finish my race with joy. And that's the kind of perspective that they have. They're on a race, and they're going to finish it with joy. The last one, of course, is forgiveness, which to me it's the most remarkable. It's the most life-changing, because I don't know how I could forgive like that. And of course, the reality is that I couldn't, but God, through me, could give me the grace to forgive. I believe that because I've seen it so many times.
You were recently in Egypt, or not too long ago. I went to Egypt last year and met with some of the families of the 21 martyrs who were killed in Libya. And I saw these widows. And one of the widows, just her face radiated. And I expected to walk in there, because this was only about a month after it happened. I expected to walk in and see the Christians sad and in mourning.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I mean, to be honest with you, the joy and the forgiveness, because to live in Egypt as a Christian is so difficult. I mean, you know how challenging it is. There's such a minority, and especially as an evangelical Christian. It's impossible, if you come from a Muslim background, to become a Christian in the civil system in Egypt, which people find, it's unbelievable. You can't change your identification card. If you're born into an Islamic family, you cannot become a Christian. It's literally impossible to do so. And so this affects things like school. I met with a Christian family. They were from a Muslim background. They became followers of Jesus. It was impossible for them for their children to go to a Christian school. It was impossible for them to even go to Christian classes in the Egyptian public school. So their children, they had to send them to school every day to sit in an Islamic, essentially madrasa for an hour and study Islamic doctrine. And they just simply couldn't do anything about it because of the fact that they had been Muslims and then chose to follow Christ. It's a very difficult place to serve as a Christian. It's impossible to get married legally. So if you're a Christian and you are born into a Christian family and then you want to marry a Muslim who has converted to Christianity, impossible. It's impossible to be married legally because the legal system does not allow it. So those are the sorts of minor oppression type issues that are happening in Egypt that people are just unaware of, and it's hard for us to kind of understand.
And that's happened despite the change in governments. I mean, you think, okay, it went from the Muslim Brotherhood to this quasi-democracy led by the military there. None of that has changed, has it?
No, it hasn't changed yet. Some people are hopeful that Sisi will be able to introduce some change, but I'm not sure. As you know, it's been a hotbed of Islamic academia for many years. The university there is the premier Islamic university, and you know that the doctrines and the perspectives of the people in the streets, I don't expect it to change anytime soon. But in spite of all that, God is at work.
The first of at least 10,000 Syrian refugees have started arriving in the United States. So how should America respond? VOM's Jason Peters says he reminds Christians about the Sermon on the Mount.
We're supposed to love our enemies. And now I don't know practically how God's going to lead our government. We have government authorities that are making these decisions and they represent us, so of course we can share our opinions. But I'll tell you this, I know that when you see an Islamic woman in Walmart, if you're a Christian woman, you should acknowledge her. I think you should be kind. I think you should smile at her. I think you should recognize her. I heard a story not too long ago of a woman who was at a playgroup in Texas. And she was an Islamic woman who brought her child to this playgroup. And a Christian woman was at the same playgroup. She noticed her, and she felt like God was leading her to go over and to talk to her. And so she went over there and she started to talk with this woman. This woman began to cry. And she was sort of surprised by this. She's like, what's happening? And the Islamic woman said to the American Christian, I've been here for years. No one has ever talked to me. Isn't that remarkable? God began to open a dialogue. He began to open a relationship. And that's the kind of relationships that we need to be building as Christians. I don't think it's going to help when that refugee family is here. It's not really going to help for us as Christians to shun them, to reject them. No, we need to show them the love of Christ. And so that's the message that we see. And by the way, our brothers and sisters living in Islamic countries, they're living in contexts where they have to love their neighbors too. And they're very difficult. Many times those neighbors are trying to attack them, but they choose to love.
Yeah. Jesus didn't say love them only when they love you back.
That's right.
Yeah. Finally, you know, there's this idea that persecution is tragic. It is horrible, something we should shun. but there is a positive to it. There is victory in it. Explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because it's a purifying, refiner's fire kind of answer that I have here. Because if you think about it, when we sort of just plod along in our lives, doing our day-to-day activities without ever having challenge or opposition to our faith, it's easy for us to become complacent. It's easy for us to be kind of lazy. But when everything is stripped away, and the only thing you have left is Jesus, you realize that's all you need. You know, I remember talking to a fourth-year university student at the University of Mosul, and ISIS came in, he lost his transcripts, he lost everything, and he was a very young man, 22 years old. But this is interesting, as I was talking with him, he had this joy about him, and he said, I lost everything, but I didn't lose my faith. And that, to me, is a purifying effect of persecution. All of the dross, all of the excess is sort of burned off. And you're left with, what do I really believe? Is Jesus worth it? We would say, yes, of course, Jesus is worth it. But has that been tested in our own experience? Probably not if we haven't faced this type of persecution. So there's a very purifying effect from persecution. And of course, we remind ourselves always that we have an eternal perspective. We walk by faith, not by sight. And so we want to look to that eternal hope. And these brothers and sisters have an eternal perspective, which is just stunning. Because they don't have the hope that we have in this life, so they're forced to look to eternity. And for me personally, it's been a challenge to say, things may not work out exactly the way I wanted to here. This is a difficult situation. But because of the example of my brothers and sisters, I can live with eternal perspective as well.
Again, the book is I Am N Christian. It's available at persecution.com, bookstores, and amazon.com. And our thanks to Jason Peters and our friends at the Voice of the Martyrs, and also to you for joining us. We hope to see you again next week. Be blessed.